Hey guys, welcome back to Art Explorers, the best art show ever. So this is Van Gogh's painting, which I think is very cool. I'm a very cool guy because I think Van Gogh was an excellent artist. That's kind of my thing. But the painting is called Bank of the Air at Ars. I don't know how to pronounce these French words, alright? Um, but a very interesting thing that I notice a lot in his painting is just how well he like leads your eye, especially in like an impressionist landscape where everything is really bright. Everything's kind of at the same level because it's all being lit by like blue sky sun pretty much. So there is not a lot of contrast, but I mean, it's not like value contrast, it's color contrast, which is, it's a totally, was like what was going on during the time. Um, but what he does really nicely is that, I mean, at the center figure, I don't know, he just puts in these really nice, harsh, like black lines on this figure, and it just immediately catches your eye. It is so spectacular. And you'll notice them all over. So then my eye kind of gets drawn over here, maybe. And then if you really look around again, he leads your eye all the way back here, even. And so that's kind of really interesting of a thing where he's in full control of how he's leading the viewer's eye. Like he's not just looking at it only from like his perspective where he knows where everything is. Like in his mind as the artist, he knows exactly where everything is and what's important. And then the hard part is how do you communicate what's important to someone, who doesn't have access to what your thought process was. I'm looking at myself in my webcam and like how like it's reversed like mirrored. So I kept like trying to pluck I brush this strand of hair with my wrong hand. um but so that's kind of like an interesting thing is like how do you show importance, and a really good thing to do is contrast. Whatever is the highest contrast will kind of lead the view. And so this is like a nice moment because it's got strong color contrast and strong value contrast because of this harsh black line. If that harsh, if those, if he didn't like silhouette out this guy right here with that black, I mean, he would have faded into the background. Which I mean, if that was the intention of the piece, then that's where like artistic liberties are coming in, because it's like you have no idea if this character was even actually there on this day. It could have been a figure that he painted like 6 months ago, and he just was like, okay, I think it's gonna look really cool if I add this character that I possibly drew off of from real life or just from imagination, and just stuck them here because I think that they're gonna set the tone. Like this character is the figure that is setting the tone of the entire picture. I would say that like I would say that's kind of sinister uh, energy for some reason. You know, like I think in some ways like he might. I mean, just like imagine if there was a character. I mean, he's got pure green skin pretty much, and it's just kind of it looks a little funky. Like this isn't what real humans look like, you know. So I mean that gives it some a bit weirder of energy, I would say. Personally, I don't know how you feel about it. Um, But so it is really nice how he is uh, able to show you, like, communicate his ideas of what he thinks is cool and important by knowing exactly what to do. He's putting this figure in the center of the canvas, which immediately like is a good spot for drawing viewers' attention because most likely the first time you look at something, you're gonna look at the exact center of it. Um, then he just uses his knowledge and like experience with getting contrast like in like nice beautiful colors, and now he's able to like show you the viewer exactly what he thinks is interesting, and like that's the hard part is like because that means he has to know how to like draw figures really well. He needs to know how to draw these boats really well. He needs to know how to draw this beach. Yeah, the beach, the sand, the water, like trees. Like he needs to know how to paint all of like draw and paint all of these elements at a super high level. Then he has to learn how to group all of these elements together into a nice appealing rectangle, just like overall composition. He needs to know how to place this bush to look nice with a figure standing next to it. Then now that he has these two elements of the bush and the figure, how does this figure relate to this figure? Then how does this figure relate to the boat? And that's kind of what you have to think about. Like, how does like the element that I'm looking at, like we'll say like the figure, like how does my figure relate to everything that's like next to him? And that's kind of how you will start being able to build out the full composition. Like I would say that the kind of the best thing to do would be, this is, let's say, your piece of paper, and what you would do is just from imagination. Okay, so I mean, we have no idea. He could have painted this picture from imagination. It could have been like I think what they were doing was like during this time was like like going outside and sketching these areas, then going back to the studio, uh, and just painting from the sketches, not necessarily painting from life. So I mean, but when you do that, there's like more imagination involved. Um, and I also and then it also progresses. You get to like Dali, who's just like everything's just done in the studio pretty much. Where it's like that's where you get like really into like dream-like stuff. Like he's not necessarily painting, I mean, like he wouldn't like he's not necessarily painting like a river that he goes out to where it's like or sketching that river. He could have been in the studio who just built a stage like something that looks like a river out of random objects, and he could have just painted that in the studio. Like you don't have like that's kind of the really interesting part of that turn of the century for into like the 1900s, where it's just like now artists don't even ever have to leave their studio. You have photographs, you have like you can get like miniature props and just build your own like landscape to paint from. Like all of these innovations are like the technological innovations are what motivate a lot of art, and like art motivates a lot of technological innovations. There's a lot of like cooperation there. But so I'm just gonna draw this from imagination now. So he had a bush here, as I remember, then a line of trees, you know, like just be really rough. Don't even necessarily think too hard on these. Just basic shapes, basic, symbols, Symbol making is a very important tool, Just coming up with a symbol. Doesn't matter. Doesn't have to be anything. That's kind of what Van Gogh would do. He had the brush, he knew he came up with a system of like a few brush strokes, and like he was like, okay, I have this like straight brush line with whatever size it was. Like he really was able to systemize whatever everything he was doing. Like, he knew exactly what his next step was always going to be because he just had like a few options. He really limited down all of the possibilities. He'd be like, no, there's an exact order to how I do these paintings, and there's an exact way to how I paint these exact brushstrokes, and there's an exact way of how I choose these colors and everything. So, I mean, one thing that I personally use is just numbers. Think about numbers a lot. Like I just draw a two. I'm not thinking necessarily of it as a tree with its branches and leaves and stuff, but when you're just thinking really abstract, that's what you have to do. And this also kind of had a similar texture. Okay. Then we had a beach, a figure right here. Then another figure. She had a dress on, and I think their hand was coming out. And then we have and then, okay, so this is how, abstract you can think. There's different levels, okay? So what I was doing was I was thinking about individual elements, then drawing them. So I was like, bush, okay, circle, I'm simplifying that down to that, and then I'm adding little texture. Okay, figure. Okay, let me just think about that. Now I have a bunch of element of the same, similar. All they're all boats in this line here, but they all have like little variations on how the boat looks. But because of that, I can imagine the line of boats, and I can be like, okay, instead of sitting here being like, okay, this boat looked like this and everything. I can be like, okay, I know that there is a line of them. I know there's a bunch of them right there. I can just take that part of space and box it, put it into a box. So now this isn't necessarily just, the boats, but I also get it in. I also get the boats in perspective more now too. But it's also, oh, it's not just the boats. It's also the water that's under the boats that I'm capturing with this box. And that's kind of an important thing. It's just to know that everything does fit inside of a box. If you just box up the entire canvas, you would be able to do whatever you wanted. That's kind of like a point of making a grid. Um, then there was a distant boat here and more trees, I believe. And this was water. Okay, so now this is what I have, and this is exactly what you should. This when you do your first lines of getting down the ideas, it's important to do this. Like, it's important to just get to this stage where there's no detail to anything. Everything is as loose as possible. There isn't any clear indication of what this is. This is just a two floating in space, but that's why you keep you make sure of the mental notes in your head. So if someone just comes here, like a random viewer, they would see this and be like, oh, okay, that's interesting. I mean, I don't really know what anything is, but I could see something. you know None of these, like, there's too much possibility of what this could be because you haven't defined anything yet. So you get to this stage, then what you do is you take a little box and you just refine this area, okay? So you're like, okay, now I know there is a top hat here. Now I can really start to have that fun of like detailing stuff. And it is very fun to detail stuff, guys. But you have to work for it. And that's kind of it's the reward, not the entire, freaking dinner. If you were gonna relate it to like a dinner, like putting in like the box and sketching in this composition, that would be like, the vegetables and the uh the detailing would be the dessert. So, personally for me, I mean, I always ate my vegetables first. So I mean, I'm like, okay, I'm not, I don't hate vegetables. I eat them. I make sure to get them out of the way, but I do want that piece of cake. So now I can use a more advanced type of stick figure, and this is pretty much the stage that Van Gogh took this figure. Because now I'm like, okay, he's got this shirt on, whatever it's going on there. Uh, then his body kind of comes in, and there we go. So now I have like it's pretty undefined, and this is where Van Gogh took the figure and was like, okay, because what you would do next is be like, okay, now I have this like down, I have the basic shapes. Now I really start detailing, you know? Like, okay, so his eyes are going to look exactly like this, you know? Now I'm and it's such tiny detail that it's hard to fully see it this far away, but when you really look in, you'll see it. And part of that is because the further away something is, you would want less detail because that just adds another level of contrast. It's another thing to contrast with, which is like, okay, so like three things that we have so far is color, value, and now we also have color, value, and detail. All right. And all of these can either be, you can think about it either one way or the other. Either the most on like the outside, like these like the corner areas here, like the most detail there, and then working inwards into, something less detailed. Or you can do it the reverse way, like the most amount of detail on here, and then coming out, it gets less detailed, But really, the way that you should be thinking about it is being like, okay, and this is what I was trying to explain earlier. But I had to like, show you that little, introduction, and now I'm explaining how to like actually do exactly what Van Gogh is thinking like. So what you would be doing is you'd say, no, I'm using, and this is what cameras can't really do very well, and what artists can do really well is taking, the way our eyes really work, where Van Gogh would be sitting on this river. Okay, so like imagine yourself in this position. You're sitting on this river. What you're looking at is, a river, trees, two figures. Oh, there's also a third figure in this boat over here, but forget that one's not important. Uh, and so whenever you look up, you're not you wouldn't like in this wide of an area, you have to move your eyes around to get more perspectives. And that's the really interesting thing is that you move your eye and like it doesn't it changes your perspective in a different way. Like your eye level, and this is a really important perspective thing. Your eye level is always straight of a line, okay? So just because I look to my side, it doesn't mean that my eye level is changing. And so what your eye level means is that your eyes are here, and on the piece, everything above this eye level, I would be looking under, and everything above this eye level, I'd be looking under, and everything below this eye level, I would be looking on top of. And so that's really important when you're trying to draw something in space because you have to be sure of, am I looking at the bottom of this table or am I looking at the top of this table? And if you mess it up, it's going to look wonky. And that's kind of what Cubism was doing, was just being like, we are so good, we know how to do perspective perfectly, but no thanks. Everything could be at a totally different wild perspective. It doesn't matter. But we kind of came out of that now. It's kind of back to like solid one eye level. But remember that it is kind of like more curved than that. Like I think that's kind of like a lot of artists are kind of doing that now, where it's like this curved perspective, like kind of like a fisheye lens, and it's like the way that it's doing that is that it's like you're imagine what it would look like if you're going to be looking at everything, like, not just one area locked in head position. You turn your head and there's a whole other part of this composition and landscape idea, and so the different ways of showing that much area and space. And so the way that it goes is that he selectively chooses where to put in most detail. So I'm gonna have a lot of detail in this area, a lot of contrast. Then maybe we'll move over to, I think it was this area, or actually maybe even this area, where he had like the moment with the bush and the boat. And then I'm gonna move over here with the last boat in the distance. And so that's the really cool part, is that now you're leading the viewer around the piece. And that's very important of a skill to have, because I'm just repeating the same thing. I'm just telling you. It's really important to understand that that's what you should be doing. There shouldn't just be like, one area of highest detail, then like successively getting lesser and lesser. There should be like, you know, 2 or 3 moments where it's the most detailed, and the rest, like, this is really important also of a thing, the value scale. You have to keep in mind the detail scale, okay? So let's say that at the top is 8 and at the bottom is 1, okay? I don't know why I'm doing it for both, but just don't worry about it. Okay, so this would be most detail, least. Ooh, least detail. Okay, so then let's say that these moments would be 8, and then that means everything else on, and this is how you relate everything in a composition. Nothing else except these 3 moments right here can ever reach level 8. Everything else has to be 7 and under now. And that's the really cool part, you know, putting in this moment where a lot of action and energy is there. And that's how you lead the eye, is that it, if you just had like it completely white and blank and then just put in 3 moments of high detail, it wouldn't give you the same kind of transition. It would be really abrupt, like smooth transitions to this like intense focus of detail are really good and really important. And the way that you get there is like through value or color, and both even. But you have to keep in mind that's like you have to also be working in mind with detail. I mean, I would disagree that everything should be at the same level of like highest detail. That doesn't make sense. But that's kind of my spiel. All right, signing out. See you guys.